Howdy, folks. Welcome to Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb. I'm the Redneck, and you bet I've gone green, and I'm trying to convince you to do it too. But remember, folks, that when I say gone green, I don't just mean Green Party, although I do mean that. I also mean understanding, rediscovering, and remembering that we are all connected. Life itself is all interconnected into a web of life. Our ancestors knew that. Indigenous people still know it. And remember, we all descend from indigenous peoples. And here on Redneck Gone Green, I want to own the know, feel, do. A reminder, what we want you to know is that we're past too many tipping points. The climate catastrophe is not coming. It's here and getting worse. We need to prepare ourselves and our communities for what's coming. We also recognize that society itself is currently being completely reorganized, whether we like it or not, as a result of a profound technological transformation of automation, robotics, and now artificial intelligence. So whether George Soros likes it or not, Donald Trump likes it or not, David Cobb likes it or not, or you like it or not, we are in a revolutionary moment because the entire social, political, economic relationship is being transformed. But wait, there's more, because we're in the end stage of the current global capitalist framework. It's no longer late stage capitalism, it's end stage capitalism. But I don't celebrate that, because if we don't actually make some profound shifts, the next stage of this is going to actually be overt national fascism. So that's what we want you to know. So what do we want you to feel? I want you to feel what I feel, which is a fundamental sense of urgency and a sense of hope and empowerment, because there is still something to be done. So I want you, what I always try to do is on this program, bring guests who are part of efforts, organizations on the ground that are doing social change work. So what I want you to do is participate actively in this conversation, but as you participate in the conversation, an invitation to you to see if Transition US is the right place for you to be. So before we bring on our guest, Nathan Liu, I want to tell you just a word or two about transition, or the transition movement. Some of you may have heard of the transition town movement that emerged out of England in 2006. It specifically was about local responses to climate change, peak oil, and resource depletion. Their approach: local, build resilient and sustainable communities to prepare people to transition into self-reliance, localized food production, renewable energy, and reduced carbon emissions. That movement has grown global. There are literally thousands of transition initiatives worldwide. And in the US, Transition US is the national hub of that effort. And now they are launching a new initiative that they call Regenerative Communities Design Lab. And that's what we're going to go deep onto. With that, I'm going to bring on my guest, Nathan Liu. Nathan was born and raised in San Diego. He has over 15 years of cultivation experience as an agroecologist, as an agroforester. He has grown food. He has cultivated. He's created resource, field, and forest capacity programs. He was recently selected to be the interim executive director of Transition US and is the co-founder and executive director of Mongol Tribe, a community and capacity building 501c3 based organization that bridges health and wellness with civic ecology. Nathan, welcome to Redneck Gone Green.
Thank you, sir. Great to be here.
So Nathan, I want to say right up front, I have the great privilege of knowing you and getting to know you over the last couple of years, I reckon. And I want to jump right into it. You already were executive director of Mongol Tribe, and now you're the interim executive director of Transition US. So because Mongol Tribe is so on the ground and a direct example of the conceptual framework of transition, I thought it might be a good idea to actually start with Mongol tribe and really talk about like what that means, what you're doing on the ground where you live, work, play, and pray.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I started Mongol Tribe as a way of gathering community to share traditional practices for land health and stewardship. And what I realized was that there's such a need for this kind of care of where does our food go, or where does it come from, and how do we actually go from a seed to a tree. And so in that process, what happened was that I started getting a lot more interest in facilitating educational workshops and hands-on opportunities for people to actually prune a tree, or plant some seeds in the ground. So yeah, really for me has started with connecting with my community here in San Diego, which is, for most folks, they don't realize, is the most productive per acre agriculture in the country. We have the most farms per county, the most organic farms per county, and there's over 300 different agricultural commodities that are grown here. So being born and raised here, it made me really recognize the value of the opportunity to build a model and show others how these different ecological strategies could be implemented, and community resilience could be really empowered and uplifted.
That's fantastic. And I know that you actually created a story map associated with that story map associated with Mongol tribe, with
Yeah.
Transition US, or both.
So the story map that I published this year in March was a pilot project that was for a Mongol tribe that we completed over the 22, early 23 year. And basically, we're looking at oak woodland restoration work in Palomar Mountains in California. And we're mainly looking at how to address the infestations of the gold-spotted oak borer in Southern California oaks, and looking at a more traditional management practice and strategy. So if you scroll down there in the story map, it tells kind of the process that we went through of showing how we're implementing this work using hand tools in an area that's sloped, which is very difficult to bring machinery into. And then how we followed up that initial treatment with grazing of sheep, particularly the Navajo Chura sheep from the Dene Reservation. And utilizing this strategy, what resulted was I did a comprehensive vegetative survey using GIS, and basically built a profile for this pilot project showing the biological diversity on site, with the hope of being able to identify which oak trees were most infested. And we were able to identify about 10 to 12 trees that house the 60 to 80% of the beetle infestation in this particular zone. So, the ability to have like a hands-on process of identifying and working through a vision of how traditional management and strategies could be implemented, to then be able to document it using modern technology so that we could model it for others who are interested in looking at the oak woodlands, because many people don't realize that the oak woodlands are the first indigenous food forest. So the tribal nations all up the West Coast have used oak woodlands as a means for food and medicine cultivation since time immemorial. So for this region of Southern California that's been most heavily hit by this particular beetle, it's been a difficult conversation because we're talking about wildfire, right? There's a lot of standing dead wood, and folks don't really know what to do with that. So we're hoping to revitalize a strong forest industry here in San Diego, which often isn't, again, considered as a forest habitat, but we actually have quite a bit of forest. Most of ours just happens to be chaparral and scrub built. So the oak woodlands kind of toe into that area along our mountain ranges. And so that relationship really started to highlight the connection between wildfire reduction and soil and water health, because the headwaters all fall into a lot of these oak woodland zones. So,
It's interesting because you are reminding me, actually, the very first time I met you was at a gathering that Ali Metters Knight, Jessica Alvarez Parfrey, Mel Figueroa, and I had all sort of brought together to talk about how can we apply some of the theories of transition. And I remember very distinctly watching you. What I thought, as a redneck, I thought, oh, that boy's whittling, right? Like I saw you with the knife, and I just thought you were whittling, right? And by the end of it, of that full day together, you had handcrafted a beautiful spoon. I don't know if you remember that particular, because I'm
Yep.
sure you know a lot of them. But then you actually described, like just in casual conversation, about, oh, this is why. And one of the things that I want to lift up and underscore from what you just shared is the ability to apply modern advanced technology with traditional tools and tool making. It's not an either or thing. It is actually what is the appropriate tool, the appropriate technology to use at the appropriate time. And so I really appreciate how you both talked about it, but more importantly, how you're putting it into practice. So I just want to honor that. And I also want to say, all right, so that's Mongol tribe and the story map that you just described. For those of you who are just listening on the podcast or watching, I'm sorry that you didn't get a chance to look at it, but just go to Mongol Tribe, MongolTribe.org, and you can take a look at it. I also, though, want to say, oh, okay, so Mongol Tribe, as an example of this, is a concrete application of how I understand the transition movement itself. And again, for viewers and listeners, I want to acknowledge that I was part of the National Transitions Collaborative Design Council. I was the co-founder of a transition initiative in Humboldt County, California, in Wiyot Ancestral Territory, what we like to tell our friends in the San Francisco Bay Area, the real Northern California, rural Northern California. So I've got some experience with it. And I am really keenly interested in hearing about this relaunch. So, Nathan, I'm going to do the same thing with transition that I did with Mongol Tribe. I'm going to ask you an open-ended question to say, tell us a little bit about what y'all are calling the Regenerative Communities Design Lab, Resist, Repair, Reimagine, Regenerate. What's that all about?
Yeah, so the Regenerative Communities Design Lab is an incubator space for bioregional hub development. So what we did is, after a lot of discussions and a network report that actually talked with a lot of transition initiative leaders, resulted in an acknowledgement that there was need for more representation, particularly BIPOC representation and youth representation, and additionally, an opportunity to learn from hands-on models. So what it seemed like was most opportune was to be able to facilitate actual, boots on the ground, from the ground up opportunities for people to really touch the soil and learn from others that are implementing different traditional strategies. So really, this movement is about supporting an ecosystem of regenerative and just communities, right? Because that's really the whole movement of transition, is to facilitate this progressive growth and development that is shifting within how we perceive the realities around us and the resources that are going to be available or not available, right? So the hope with this is then to support the development of local pilot projects that will align service providers, particularly BIPOC communities and frontline communities, with resources and land and access to be able to implement the traditional strategies that we've been utilizing since time immemorial. And ideally, this is an opportunity then for people from all different sectors and places in their journey to connect with others and learn from those other successes in their region. So the hope of this is to facilitate a gathering space. And because of technology, again, we're really grateful that we have this wonderful partner at the Center for Regeneration, where we can leverage this platform they've been developing for the last decade to aggregate a lot of these connections and spaces and be able to help others to start quantifying, right? We have certain grants we're going after. So being able to document the metrics and the impact of those grants, being able to just, again, share that community contribution to a project is really critical. And in a space where there's need for more transparency about the interaction and contribution of both individuals and organizations, we need to have a mechanism or a tool to be able to help us to show the impact that we're having, again, both to funding agencies, to donors, to granting agencies, as well as to our community at large. Because, the challenge is that a lot of times the folks that are leading the way, and again, transition historically has been very white led, and has gratefully acknowledged a need for that to change. So we're supporting that change, right? We're helping to elevate the voices that have often been underserved and not listened to. And so through this process, we're really excited to be able to roll out this connection to this platform at Center for Regeneration and really elevate that opportunity to collaborate.
Folks, you're listening and or watching Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb. I am the Redneck, and you bet I've gone green, and I'm trying to convince you to do so as well. I also want to remind you that this kind of conversation is not sanctioned by corporate America, by the folks who are in control of the various algorithms. So I really am going to appeal to you to like, share, subscribe. We have a Substack called Redneck Gone Green. That's where I post writings, and I always try to write a thought piece about every show that we're going to do. We do this show weekly as a video, a live video and podcast. You can catch us on YouTube conveniently at Redneck Gone Green. We're also on Rumble. And can you guess? That's right. It's Redneck Gone Green. Wherever you're catching it, please subscribe there and help us build the audience so that we can continue to have this conversation that is not filtered by the corporate media masters that are preventing knowledge and information being shared. Today, we're speaking with Nathan Liu. Nathan was born and raised in San Diego. He's got 15 years of experience as an agroecologist and agroforester. He's been recently selected to serve as interim executive director of Transition US, and he's now describing for us a new initiative that they're calling the Regenerative Communities Design Lab. Nathan, I wanted to return back to that design lab and ask you, is this just for existing transitioners, or are you inviting people relatively new to transition to come and join you? Tell us a little bit more about what audience you're hoping to participate in this invitation.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, transition has a 10-year legacy. So, of course, we want to acknowledge and appreciate the immense contributions to the movement that have been facilitated over the last decade. And also, at the same time, we want to recognize that there's been a very isolated or, limited reach based on the folks that have been working in transition historically. So we are looking to expand the reach of transition and make sure that it is comprehensively inclusive. And so the fundamental change that we're recognizing that's needed to happen is that we need to center frontline and BIPOC communities. So really at the heart of this is to elevate those that have been doing the work for, again, since time immemorial, and have continued to show up even in spaces where there again hasn't always been a recognition of their contribution or scientific validation. And so, traditional ecological knowledge and these other pieces are really at the center of this Regenerative Communities Design Lab. But we also know that there's a role for everybody. And there's a need for both legacy transition folks as well as folks who have never heard of transition to participate. Without a large scale inclusion within our communities, we're going to have a tough time really addressing the impacts that we're going to be facing over the next decade or two. And the sooner we start to unite and get on the same page about how to implement strategies for ecological restoration and community resiliency, the sooner that we're going to see our communities that are going to be those ones that are really thriving and setting the precedents for others around the world.
And that launch party goes live in just 2 days on September 21. And I'm looking at the website and I'm really inspired by how you're thinking about not just what you're doing, but the different types of audience, right? So I'm going to invite you to say a word about the difference between advisors, collaborators, and investors. Like there is a level of intentionality to that I find profoundly refreshing. Too often on the left or in progressive circles, you just sort of throw people together, but there's a level of real deep thoughtfulness reflected in that subdivision. I'm wondering if you could say a word or two about that.
Yeah, so it's been an interesting process of going through this recognition, but really the thing that we keep coming back to is that the more we invest in our communities, that the more that we're going to see that work, the training, the opportunities to really implement successful strategies start to unfold. I'm trying to recall the exact number, but I heard from an investor at a conference I attended last year that it was like investing in BIPOC communities resulted in a 3 times return value compared to any particular other community. So, those things, we don't take it lightly, right? Like that we're part of those communities and we see the value of our impact. And we really feel like the more that we lean into that and trust that process, the more that we also invite folks to the table to have, authentic dialogue and conversations about the solutions and the mechanisms that exist that we can leverage in transition, right? Like we're building bridges. The whole point of this is to be able to figure out what can we do now, but we also have to be planning ahead and we have to really consider how things are going to change and being able to have enough, foresight to where we can put some intention into paper. That's been a really big piece for us. So we started working on a strategic plan and we've been looking at our, next 6 to 12 months as like our fundamental focus right now of what is our strategy for the next 6 to 12 months. And then we're over that duration going to be building out this Regenerative Communities Design Lab. And following that, we're going to also see our full strategic plan develop from it. So this really is, this launch party is really, it's a catalyst point for us. And we're really hopeful that we're going to have some of the legacy transition investors and folks that have been involved for a long time hop on board and participate and recognize that transition is making a pivot. It's making a transition of its own. It's shifting. And the opportunity because of that shift is what's going to help it to move forward successfully in the future.
Nathan, as you're describing this, I am reminded of a very dear friend, George Friday. George, if you're listening, I want you to know that I think of you often and I love you very much. She once said, if I hear a lot of people talk about being social change agents and social change, and she says, if you're a social change agent, you have to understand you're intentionally, whether you know it or not, you're actually courting a certain level of chaos because wherever the change happens, you have to interrupt something and send it in a new direction. That's what the change is. So that moment of where a change happens, whether it's positive or negative, there's always a bit of chaos around it, right? And so to me, I think that that's a really powerful way of thinking about both social change and what pivots mean. And I want to tell you, Nathan, Kelly, who is a very frequent listener, viewer, and commenter. Thank you, Kelly, for being such an active participant in Redneck Gone Green. She's asked in the chat, could you elaborate on this from the perspective of a person in a community? That is the collaborator, like the different sectors. Could you help say a little bit more to Kelly, who may not be as entrenched in transition itself? Nathan, are you with us? Are you having some challenges with technology? I'm not sure.
I think I'm having some technical difficulties on my end.
Okay, well, that's okay. I always like to say, Jack and other listeners of Redneck Gone Green have heard me say it before. It always gives me the opportunity to bring my mama onto this material plane. She helped to raise me. Mama and Papa did with my mama whenever I was a little infant to a toddler. And she used to say this, oh, did this mistake happen? Or did this thing happen to you that you weren't expecting? And then she'd say, well, I hope that's the worst mistake you make or the worst thing that happens to you today. What a great day you're going to have. And so it always helps to remind me that when little missteps happen or technological glitches or anything else comes up like this, that's okay. We're actually working through it and that, we'll get by. And if it's a mistake, that's all right. We're all better than the mistakes that we make. And we'll continue to make mistakes, but we fail forward. Nathan, it looks like you may have got that problem solved, and I will let you know that we are seeing, and I think we can hear you. So Nathan, you want to come back on and let's give it a shot? Nathan, maybe you're not hearing me then is the problem.
Yeah, so, it's interesting because, I'm having trouble hearing you a bit. It's a little choppy, but, I picked up a piece of, kind of what you're expressing about just the, the potential for change. I mean, I think about that all the time. Like, you start digging around in the soil too much and, you might push things the wrong direction. But, it's kind of one of those situations where you dig around a little bit and you find it, the practice to facilitate hope. And, you got to plant 1,000 seeds and see what happens. There's a process of change that we're witnessing. And that's part of the thing about an iterative process is that it's going to be dynamic and living and chaotic. And, that's one of those situations where, we're always hopeful we can work through those challenges. And the fact that we're at this point where we're able to, pursue this opportunity, it's just, again, I feel really grateful to be in this position of support. And I can elaborate a bit further about, so it says, a perspective from a person in a community and then ... So, I'm not exactly sure what the following on that part is. But basically, the hope is that with aligning within our communities, the idea being that if we can centrally aggregate some of that connection space where it can create a cohesive space where we can have an opportunity to share resources, share knowledge, share insights, but then also have a space where we can collaborate around a specific project. That's a really valuable tool. And especially when you can incorporate things such as the gathering of metrics, right? One of the things we talk about when it comes to traditional ecological knowledge and the way we quantify success, right, is that the boxes that we're checking are totally different than oftentimes what's listed before us from a municipal grant or a government agency. So the challenge right now is kind of like rewriting that book, really showing kind of what are the things we should be measuring and quantifying, what are the things our communities actually need, not what falls into this small list of boxes that could be checked on a grant application, right? We're really seeing an opportunity to to connect with folks who are actually living in an area, support purpose and place in that relationship, to really like have a real discourse and dialogue with folks that, can tell you, hey, here's how I had success. Here's the challenges I had. So to be able to like find a place where we can gather with like-minded folks, but also we can align with projects that have social impact and ecological benefits. I think that's a really powerful tool. And so, again, it's going to come down to who's doing it. And that's the biggest questions we constantly have, are like, who is located in my region that's doing this kind of work? How do I support them? How do I connect in with them? How do I see more of those kind of projects start to develop? And those are the questions we're really trying to answer, and leverage this Regenerative Communities Design Lab to facilitate not only those interactions, but those dialogues that are going to result in collaborations in specific places, purpose and place being at the heart of it.
So Catherine, who is another frequent viewer, listener, commenter, writes in, it still sounds pretty vague. Can you be more specific? And Catherine, I'll give you an example from my end, and then invite Nathan to give other specifics, and as many as he'd like. But I'll give you an example, Catherine. The Native Roots Network is a group that I collaborate with and work with that's here more or less in my bioregion. They're in the Shasta area of rural Northern California. They're up and over a mountain range from me, but they're still within my bioregion. And one of the things that they're doing, for example, is what they call acorn economics. And what they're saying is, as the Native Roots Network, we know that since time immemorial, we have engaged in commerce. We have fed ourselves and others. We have clothed ourselves and others. We have provided housing for all of us. And we did it in balance and in right relationship with all of life itself. And central for us was the acorn. And that meant gathering acorns, harvesting them, but not gathering a whole bunch, hoard them, and then sell them one at a time. That's what modern economics would call the commodity value of the acorn. Instead, the Native Roots Network is reminding us and themselves and others in that community that the acorn itself was a staple. And it was used, right? So in economics, it's the difference between use value and surplus value. And so you use it. Yes, you can use it actually as exchange and bartering a basket of acorns for this or that. But the main thing is, how do we put this to local use for ourselves in a regenerative way that's in balance? And one of the things, for example, that comes out of that is it helps you to rethink time. Because you don't harvest acorns on September 1st. You harvest acorns when they fall from the tree. Now, that's typically in the autumn, and around September 1 is when it is. But getting into remembering what our ancestors once knew about being in balance with nature and cycles and rhythms and systems, that's an example for me, acorn economics, to say, okay, how do we actually harvest acorns? What do we do with the acorns when we harvest? How do we distribute them or share them with others? They're really what modern economics would call supply chains and value adds, right? But the point is, traditional ecological knowledge always had that, but it's been denigrated because you couldn't maximize profits with it. Instead, they were just all they were concerned about was being in right relationship with all of life and sustaining themselves and others in balance. You know what we should all be doing? So, Catherine, to me, there's an example, I hope, Nathan, if I'm not being so bold, very concretely of a specific type of project that y'all might be talking about. Nathan, do you have any examples that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, sure. So We're working with an organization called California Open Lands. And our colleague that you mentioned earlier, Ali Metters-Knight and Melo Figueroa, they've been doing amazing work with their organization, Chico TEK, to do workforce development training, specifically in traditional ecological knowledge. And so we're seeing this actually in Southern California too. Our La Jolla band of Indians are working on a lot of training folks for cultural burning. And so there's a lot of these like direct relationships with indigenous communities who are seeking to reacquire land and using the resources that are coming down to be able to acquire their historic lands, to be able to put them back in indigenous management. And so we're seeing that there's a need for support in uplifting those practices, because there are so many folks that there's just not any training. And so the hope being that we can partner with folks like California Open Lands to help support the opportunity for workforce development to unfold, because the only way we're going to be able to implement at the scale that's necessary is to start having folks be trained in these traditional strategies and be able to actually put them to practice. So the hope of these projects, really, it's that each region is going to have a particular suite, right? Like there's going to be a series of strategies that are going to work in each region, and that are going to be led by indigenous communities and BIPOC communities as a whole. And so the goal being that rather than us having to tell people, okay, here's how we think you should do it because you have this particular eco region, we're going to be really leaning into the communities that are implementing already. And we're going to find those opportunities on land with indigenous teachers and folks that have experience working in community to be able to help facilitate that engagement. So the real opportunity here is to build a bridge between where there's been oftentimes a lot of tension, or again, a lack of acknowledgement. Indigenous communities, they have a tough time sharing their wisdom because it's been stolen, intellectual property and all of those other pieces, right? There's just obviously a loaded history in that. But to be able to really have that trust, one of my indigenous elders here in San Diego, he shared with me, there's only maybe 30 folks in his tribal community that still speak the indigenous language, and he's one of those keepers of that knowledge. And he reminded me that that if they don't share that wisdom, and if they don't share it to more than just their indigenous community, then that knowledge is going to be lost. So that's really the reality of where we're at right now, is that we have folks that are ready to share this info, and we have to find a way of doing that with respect and integrity so that we can implement those strategies with their leadership and guidance in a way that's respectful to the land and appropriate, rather than one that's continuing to be extractive and commodifying. So I really feel like right now that's the big kind of point that we're at, is we're building those bridges, and we're really hopeful and excited about the ones that we've already started. And we're continuing to look on how we can expand those across the rest of the nation. We're just really leaning into those relationships that we already have, because again, that's the low-hanging fruit. And, in my community here in San Diego, I've been building those relationships for over the last decade. So we're really trusting our partners in this and leaning into those opportunities to identify which projects and organizations are really leading the way that we can help to bolster and empower through the network that we have as an organization.
Nathan, I'm going to bring back Kelly's comment. Kelly writes, many people in rural communities are separated from what is produced. There's no local butcher even, let alone urban communities who may or may not have a community garden. This is only one small aspect, but for a non-organizer to understand what this would mean to their life. In other words, and I think this is a really important point. Like Kelly joins us with frequency. And I know that Kelly is not what she would think of as a hardcore, organizer, but she's clearly interested in what we're talking about. And I mean this sincerely, Kelly, I really appreciate that you're participating on Redneck Gone Green and actively engaged and asking questions and pushing us to break it down. And as Kalia Kuno teaches me to say, break it down without dumbing it down, right? So I'm going to challenge you, Nathan, to say, all right, Kelly, I'm telling you right up front, is not a traditional hardcore organizer, right? But she's asking, what would this mean in my everyday life if I were to find a way? What's my entry point? What would it look like? What would it change? Help make this relevant to Kelly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so there's a few aspects of this that come to mind immediately. One, it's that first, community. We need to have community that we can actually lean into for these practices. And that to me also means that there's a pathway of value, right? That resource value, and we're talking about energy, right? Because when it comes down to it, how we put both our time and our resources will influence the energy that comes out from it. So when I encourage folks to participate in this on an individual level, the way that folks are going to benefit is that, being able to see these kind of projects into reality is critical, right? That there's a need for influencing how decisions are being made and how people perceive the value of these kind of contributions. So the hope being that, we can start creating we can support kind of the reskilling, right, of humans, that there's some lost information that really is critical to our survival that we could be leaning into. And so I think that that's number one, is that the community, right? We really need to align with our local community. We need to acknowledge our elders. We need to acknowledge those folks who are doing the work and be able to really build that relationship. So that's number one for me. The other side of it is that by doing this work and actually implementing successful projects, right? The hope is that we can start seeing an aggregation, a cohesion of local organizations, right? Because everything is so siloed these days, especially in nonprofit worlds. So the way I like to think about this is myceliation, right? We're needing that fungal glue to connect everything, to really build soil aggregates, right? To really build cohesiveness in our communities. So, the ability for again, educational opportunity, workforce development opportunity, resource creation, right? From food to medicine, that to me is materials. Let's talk about housing, right? If you're going to have people working the land, you need to be able to have housing. You need to be able to have food. So how do we get that? I'm a big proponent of timber frames. So, one of my hopes is to be able to see more of the regenerative use of wood and wood materials, to be able to support the actual care that's needed to implement these strategies. So I really feel like the opportunity to myceliate and aggregate the right organizations, the right people, the right projects, to be able to really facilitate the opportunity for folks to drop in and to build that relationship. I think that's the goal, right? It's and again, we're going out on this this hope and this vision that with using this tool at the Center for Regeneration, we can aggregate enough understanding using the metrics and those relationships with funding agencies and granting agencies to be able to garner larger volumes of resources so we can act as a pass-through to these different projects. So, right now, again, we're in an incubation phase, but knowing what we know about the state of ecological restoration as a whole, and really trusting and leaning into our advisors who have hands-on experience in acquisitions, both of land and resources through grants and other fundings. We are really confident that with the right pilot projects, we can show that this mechanism has the opportunity to generate community resiliency, that we can actually put more food into the community. We can actually generate more jobs. And so again, this is, we're thinking in a very idealistic manner, but we're also using practical technological tools and resources to strategize on how can we actually implement this. Because when it comes down to it, we can talk about these things all day, but someone's got to get out and care for the sheep. Someone's got to go, water the garden. So those pieces right now are really what we're focusing on, are just the basic fundamentals of life. Like who's going to build the housing? We need people to do these things, and we need to do it in a regenerative and sustainable way, because the way that we've been doing it is not working. And so I think, yeah.
Nathan, I thank you for that. And I want to bring in Kelly and then Dave. Kelly also writes, to inspire a regular person to reach out to their local groups and point them to you and grants making the transition. And she continues, yes, we have lost so many skills for basic survival, and these are not taught in schools. And I thought that, Kelly, thank you for that comment, because I think it's a profoundly important one. Because again, I have the honor, I'm an employee of the Wiyot tribe here. And one of the things that our tribal administrator pointed out when we were working with a group of educators, and she said, in our culture and our experience, we didn't separate the children from their parents and the rest of the community and then segregate them off and then, tell them, all right, here are the things you're going to learn, and here is the subject you learn now, right? And by the way, neither did any of our ancestors. I mean, again, remember, indigeneity is a worldview of connection and being in balance wherever you are within that ecosystem. And the way humans and primates have always learned and taught is by doing that, and by watching others do it. And I think that one of the things that I have appreciated, Nathan, about what I'm hearing from you is, we should just begin to practice. What is it to grow a garden? What is it to harvest from a forest? What is it to actually make things? And I think that there is something very powerful about, with your hands, making the things. And again, we're not discounting that there's a place for modern technology, but there's also a real place for a do-it-yourself approach to housing, to food production and distribution, to what my mama did. I remember as a little boy thinking that she was magic when she would take these apples, and then I didn't think of it as processing, but she peeled them, she cored them. Then I knew, oh, wow, she makes apple preserves. She also makes apple butter. And my mama will tell you, I loved apple butter. I remember as a little boy, right? So the point I'm making is, learning to do these things is actually a very important and valuable skill that we actually need to learn. If we've forgotten, relearn. Am I on the right track here, Nathan?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it really is a lot of those traditions. And, again, the way that, the economy and society has taken us away from that intergenerational, multicultural connection. That's been the loss of our spirit at times. So that's the hope, is to revitalize those relationships and those connections to ourselves and our ancestry and our communities.
So, I also want to thank Dave for jumping in, and also for the respectful way he asked a rather challenging question. And I'm going to invite you, Nathan, to respond. Dave says, no disrespect to your guest, but I think his early presentation is targeting an audience of investors, donors, grant makers. How would you respond to that observation and constructive critique? Oh gosh, it may be a technological ecological problem again. So, so I'll just jump in to say, Dave, I actually think that that's an accurate observation, and to which I would say is not every presentation is appropriate for every person, right? So as I read what the Regenerative Design Lab is doing, it is an invitation to invite both advisors and on the ground practitioners and investors and donors. So to me, I didn't see, like, again, to me, it didn't seem like it was exclusively to the donors, but that actually there was a space for donors to actually say, look, invest in this transition. I don't know, Nathan, if you're hearing me, if you agree, if you disagree. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's definitely accurate. It's like we need a whole ecosystem of folks, right? The investors, donors, grant makers, yeah, those folks are a part of it, right? They're being, for them to be able to see the way that the resources are going to be utilized is key, right? The real need, though, is the folks that are on the ground doing the work. So, our first invitation, this launch party invitation, it's really designed around folks that are either already implementing indigenous strategies or are interested in them, are connected to some type of community or organization that's working in those areas. We're wanting to connect in with the community that is interested in incubating these kind of spaces. That's why we're calling it an incubation space, right? Is that right now it's a lot of there's a lot of coordination that needs to happen. So, we're trying to get people onboarded to the platform so that way we can create a group, a network of folks that can continue to have interaction around this space. So that way we can start identifying folks that are regionally associated, and we can start having that specific conversation. And so this really is, for the rest of this year, at very least, we're going to be focused on getting people into the platform so that way we can have that connectivity and weaving happen. Because what's beautiful about the platform is that if you mark yourself into a location, we can display it on a map and we can show our Regenerative Communities Design Lab and its cohesiveness and connectivity. And so from that platform, the hope is that we can get as many people on board there so we can start identifying where there's opportunity to co-create. Like where's the low-hanging fruit? Where are people already doing this work, and where are people at that would like to see more of that work done, but maybe just need a little bit of help? So that's really the goal. The investors and donors, they're they're going to be there. I mean, they're going to be around. The grants are going to be around. Really what we need are the people that can help us implement these strategies. That's really the heart of it.
So I just want to, I'm going to give you a chance to close out, but I want to lift up a couple of questions that are in the chat to invite you as we close it out. Kelly writes, it's okay to pitch investors and donors, but we also have examples for the person. Catherine writes in to say, as a very senior person, it looks to me like we simply need to teach our children what we learned as children and then dismissed for a softer, easier way. She asked, does that make sense? And then lastly, Richard does ask you to describe what you mean by, quote, platform. I think Richard may have missed the earlier regenerative group that you were with. So as we close it out, I'm going to invite you, Nathan, to reflect on some of these comments from Kelly, Catherine, and Richard.
Yeah. The platform is, we have a partner at the Center for Regeneration who has been developing an online platform for collaboration. And so that's in its beta, and we're going to be talking about that on Thursday at our launch party, where we're going to give a full overview of it, a walkthrough, and kind of share some highlights of why we think it's going to be an amazing impact tool. I really appreciate that reflection about just, again, going through that traditional practice of really raising our families, raising our communities well. And, that's something where I feel really grateful that I've had, family and communities that are involved with land and with food in different ways. My grandfather was a butcher, so just that connection to food has always been really near and dear to my heart. And so I really feel like that's a reason why I'm working in the way I do. And I hope that others get to have those same types of experiences. But I know that it's few and far between at times. And so we're really, again, trying to lean into that relationship of how do we model and how do we show, because that's right. That's how we raise mindful and respectful children.
Nathan, I want to thank you so much for joining us here on Redneck Gone Green and talking to us about Transition US and the relaunch that you're doing. I want to remind folks that you can get connected to that at transitionus.org. September 21st, that's this Thursday, there's a relaunch party. All are invited, and hope that you'll be able to join them for their relaunch. And I also want to remind you that you've been listening and are watching Redneck Gone Green, a place where we try to go beyond the ain't it awful, and my goodness, things are awful, but actually we're trying to push ourselves to lift up the voices of people and organizations who are actually doing something to literally transition away from the power over dominator extractor model and return us to, because it's not something new. It is actually a return us to how humans always existed. For most of our time on planet Earth, we have actually been in power with communities where we were actually meeting our needs for use value rather than surplus value. I will say capitalism and settler colonialism is actually the perversion. That's actually what's got us in this mess. And the way we get out of the mess is to return to the ecologically sustainable, socially just way of sharing power to make and implement, like you both make decisions collectively, then you implement them where everybody has not only a voice, but and watch this, everybody gets the opportunity to work. It's not that everybody is forced to work, that everybody gets to offer their gifts, because it feels good to offer your gifts when you are celebrated for it and you know that you're actively participating in something good. The problem in capitalism is if you're a worker, you know damn good and well that your labor is being extracted, and you're being pushed around and bossed about. You're not actually having a new lived experience. So I want to thank you again for joining us. Just towards the end, you started to generate even more comments in the chat. So thank you to everyone for that. I also want to invite you to join us next week when our guest will be Emily Kawano. Emily and I, as a matter of full disclosure, we both serve as the co-coordinators of the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network, and Emily is the co-director of the Wellspring Cooperative, and she's going to be talking to us about her experience launching multiple different worker-owned cooperatives, both what the challenges are, the lessons learned, and how to actually meet people's needs. Thanks so much. Don't quit. Keep on keeping on. Peace.